Tosin Abasi may very well be one of the most progressive guitarists of this instrumental modern guitar wave. He, along with his band Animals as leaders, have always managed to sound a cut above the rest in regards to most aspects of their music. Productions are always on point, song structures sound like something out of the Baroque era, and the guitar playing is quite literally mind-altering. Now, I'm not here to just gas up the engine, because Tosin has definitely had his fair share of criticism when it comes to the absurdly complex rhythms and the presence of melodic friction that makes up his most notable soundscapes. But honestly, regardless of whether you dislike or absolutely love the sounds he creates, the capabilities he possesses as a guitarist will be looked back on in the decades to come, because truthfully, Tosin's in a league of his own. Before I go any further, I have to address the fact that Tosin's guitar playing is certainly not for everyone. So I'm going to do my best to build this take off of more objective reasoning, because I don't think you need to be a fan of this metal jazz hybrid sound in order to appreciate what he brings to the table as a guitar player. Now, it's hard to talk about Tosin Abasi without referencing Animals as leaders, since most of his guitar works are showcased through the band's releases. But the one thing I've always found so fascinating about Animals as leaders are the guitarists that make up the band, specifically the unique backgrounds that both Tosin Abasi and Javier Reyes come from. Javier performed as a trained classical guitarist prior to transitioning to metalcore based music, and while Tosin has been rocking the heavier stuff for quite some time, his musicianship has steadily improved throughout his career, expanding his sound into jazz fusions and more technical styles of metal. With Tosin and Javier deriving most of their sounds from the two most technically respected genres, it sets the precedent for what they're actually trying to accomplish with Animals as leaders. These aren't just metalheads teaming up to make blasphemous sounds. There's a ton of nuance being applied from their respective genres that's expressed in what they're creating.
When you start playing classical and jazz, you realize, whoa, I can sit alone and produce what sounds like full-blown multiple-part music on this net.
And all this does is add another layer of dimension when you look beyond the surface of just what the music sounds like. Even though Animals as Leaders is one of the more established bands in the progressive metal genre, Tosin's resume of accolades and music groups he's been a part of is more than capable of standing alone, because what he's accomplished just as a guitar player is quite impressive. And honestly, I don't think Tosin is globally admired for the music he makes. I think he's respected by so many listeners and musicians, more so because of what he can do. Not every artist or musician that develops their craft is striving to be the literal best in their niche. Nor is it entirely reasonable for everyone to aim for that, since being the best doesn't always translate to people loving what you make the most. In Tosin's case, his approach to guitar playing comes across as though he is genuinely trying to conquer the instrument. He's applied virtually every well-known tactic into his playing style, and it seems like after so many years he gets bored of conventional techniques and just starts making stuff up. Unquestionably, the one he's most known for is thumping, and for good reason. Now, most people are aware that Tosin didn't exactly create thumping, but he did pretty much pioneer the modern guitar thumping sound, and years later he continues to utilize it in some crazy ways. There's plenty of other artists that have also incorporated thumping in their works, but most of them apply it as a melodic component, which makes sense. Tosin, on the other hand, is actively trying to push the envelope of ways to make use of it, which I absolutely commend. Now, like I said, Tosin is most known for thumping, but he has an arsenal of unconventional ways of playing. One of them being selective picking, which I still have a hard time wrapping my head around.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you got...
It's his way of increasing continuity across note patterns, and I've tried it, but it requires breaking instinctive playing habits, which is a task in and of itself. Another technique of his is this sweep hybrid picking, which I recently found out he refers to as swibrid picking, and it's used to create this legato note run when arpeggiating chords. Again, it's tough to conceptualize, but when you hear it, it does sound pretty majestic. Of course, there have been other guitarists that have in some way utilized these techniques, but likely not to the extent that Tosin has. And what puts him in this godly tier of guitar playing is that he doesn't just adopt a technique for a year or so and then shelf it. Everything he does, he's pushing to the absolute limit, finding more elaborate ways to develop and expand its sound. And how can you not respect that? The trade-off you do give up is that in this pursuit, everything may not be the most melodically satisfying, but that's the price you pay to move the ball forward. And even though his pieces may not share the predictable sequencing of popular music, the way he writes has this mesmerizing effect that sends you on an audible journey. Tosin is pretty much the equivalent of a modern day classical artist looking for innovative approaches to adopt in his playing. And when you hear him talk about music or listen to him play, it's very clear that he is shooting for mastery. And the cherry on top is that Tosin, along with Animals as leaders, are one of the most polished live bands out right now, especially when you take into account the complexity of what they're playing. Most of their performances sound like they could have been pulled straight from the record, and all of this in conjunction really shows the musicianship that's at play.
They just get it.
As we all know, attacking music from this unique angle doesn't come without a little resistance. If you were to read any forum online pertaining to Tosin's guitar playing, or even Animals as leaders, you'll likely find at least a handful of comments stating that his guitar playing isn't music, or that it's simply a collection of notes to showcase his technical ability. And I think this is the fence that divides most listeners. People either lean towards appreciating the artistry for what it is, or they view it as etudes to just show off technical guitar playing. Really, there's kind of truth to both sides. First off, there is an insane amount of theory behind Tosin's use of harmonies and polyphonic rhythms. So if you're not already a fan of dense, heavy instrumental music, this style is a taste that has to be acquired. And second, I really think the way Tosin approaches music and the way he sees the guitar even is at a more advanced level than most. The pieces he puts out and the style of music he plays, I do believe are an accurate representation of his musical identity. To put it bluntly, I would strongly argue that he is one of the best guitarists of our time. And in reference to the statement I made earlier, being the best doesn't always mean what you make is going to be the most admired. The path that Tosin is on is not the path that most artists and guitarists are trying to take. He's not out to create the most widely enjoyable prog metal. Tosin has his foot planted on the style he wants to develop, and he's trying to become the absolute best at it. And I think this is a fact that has to be understood when evaluating his music or his guitar playing. Because when you look at it from the sense of what he's after, it's easier to not fall into the notion of saying that what he makes isn't quote unquote music. Music is so subjective, making that a really tough point to argue in any setting, but I really don't think most people see the guitar the way he does. His music is not the easiest to replicate, which already adds some validation to that claim. And on top of that, the way he applies theories to his music is on par with some of the greatest composers ever. It isn't just for show. The guy knows exactly what he's doing. So when you compare what he makes to other bands and artists, it becomes difficult to measure them on the same scale. There's almost too much depth in Tosin's music and guitar playing to simply compare his sound to someone else's. Unless the artist on the other side of that comparison is also trying to innovate to a ridiculous degree. Tosin Abasi will almost certainly go down as one of the godfathers of guitar. Again, I don't think it'll necessarily be because of the music he makes, but for his actual skill and understanding of music in relation to the guitar. He will for sure be a legend. His approach to music is pretty unorthodox, yet it can still casually be enjoyed, which doesn't always have a mutual association. And outside of just his music, he's had a substantially large impact on the guitar world in a relatively short time. Tosin has almost single-handedly popularized the use of extended range guitars, which are just guitars that have more than the traditional 6 strings, and has even launched a successful guitar brand that, similar to himself, is in a league of its own. He is so far out of the mold that you almost have to recognize that he may just be built a little different. I'm beyond hyped to see where Tosin and Animals as leaders end up just within the next 5 years, and I already know it's going to be somewhere absolutely insane. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.